Hello, everybody. This is Eric Apricot, and I'm joined by Perks from GSW Reddit. The preseason is going to start in a few days, so this is a great time to check in on the training camp roster. The roster consists of returning players that we know a lot about, like Steph, Andrew, Draymond, GP2, Looney, Kuminga, Moody. So those seven guys, we have a pretty good idea of who they are, and we have lots of hopes about how they might have improved for the summer, but we won't know that until we see the games. We're going to talk about the other guys, the young guys like Brandin and Trayce, but then all the new people who've been added to the roster. So let's talk a little bit about Brandin and Trayce. We saw them a bunch during Summer League.
Podziemski and Jackson-Davis both only got like a 3-game stint in. I think Brandin looked a lot more comfortable than he did last year, which was important for him. Obviously, he did play a full year in the NBA, so that kind of helps with that. But it's still good to see the second-year guys looking like second-year guys in Summer League. I like the aggression Brandin showed. He was looking for his offense when he was playing, putting up some shots. The 3-ball was looking nice. So that was a positive sign from him.
Brandin definitely was trying to be the point guard. He had the ball a lot and tried to set up people a lot. He couldn't resist, I think, going for a lot of highlight plays, which made it way fun to watch, but also I think led to a ton of turnovers. Brandin, as you said, he's looking for a shot more. He definitely was better than last year because his last summer league was pretty bad. He just didn't have a shot at all. It was probably like 25% or something like that from 3 or 20. But it was really good to see him trying to play a different role and then also be a real standout in this setting.
With Trayce, he's a great communicator defensively. That Draymond aspect of his game of being that leader defensively in that back line. And so I think we saw a bit more of that, which was nice. I would have liked to see him be a little bit more aggressive with his offense. I think for someone like him who has an established role already with the NBA team and is pretty effective at that role, Summer League can be a good opportunity to try things that you don't normally have the opportunity for in a regular game, like maybe stretching the floor a little bit or showing off those post moves that he did in college. So I was a little disappointed we didn't see that part of Trayce's game, but I think he still overall had a good Summer League.
Trayce Jackson-Davis, he played, 4 years in Indiana, and he was the man by the end.
Yeah.
Ran their offense through him. And so he's posting up a lot and taking shots. And definitely in the pros, that's not really his role anymore. I know that some of the staff have said they want him to grow in that direction. And I know that they wanted him to work on communication on the defensive end and then being a leader. I remember clips of the USA Select team just of him mic'd up and just yelling out coverages and where the screens are coming from and things like that.
Watch it. I'm here. I'm right. Right shoulder. Left shoulder. You through. Short. I'm there.
Anyway, he looked like he was one of the better players on the court, and that's what you want. You want your second-year players to look so good that you don't really want to risk any injury after 2 or 3 games.
I was at every Chase game, and the energy in the arena was so noticeably different when Trayce and Brandin played that last game than it was the first 2. It's nice to see those guys going from cheapest rookies trying to stake their place in the NBA to being these guys who are recognized and prominent talents.
I also noticed that a number of the other players in interviews talked about how Brandin and Trayce were the leaders.
And that's very telling when you have 2 guys relatively young in age being looked in that light.
So in the meantime, we also picked up some new people. We essentially turned Klay Thompson and Chris Paul into De'Anthony Melton, Buddy Hield, and Kyle Anderson.
I felt Anderson was a good fit for them. The way he plays just makes sense with how Kerr likes to run his offenses. I think he's going to be a nice fit. I don't know how much he's going to play because he is getting up there in age, but I would expect him to be like a part of that core 8. You obviously have your 5 starters, whatever combination that looks like. I'm guessing at this point that Melton probably starts along with JK, Draymond, and Wiggins, and obviously Steph. And then you'd have Brandin and Trayce as your 6-7. And then I think Anderson would be the 8th guy. So I think he'll be someone who plays a lot. Very cerebral, very smart. He has a nickname Slow-Mo because of the way he operates offensively, but it's just so effective. And there have been games in the past, both when he was a Spur and when he was with obviously the Timberwolves recently, where he was just killing the Warriors sometimes. And I felt like a player like that is just such a seamless fit on an offense like this. We've seen in the past that it's not enough for you to be a good shooter or be athletic like someone like Kelly Oubre, right? To play in the Warriors offense, you have to be cerebral and really understand how the pieces work together.
Steve Kerr definitely was excited about that.
Mhm.
He's talked about basically how smart Kyle Anderson and De'Anthony Melton are. My experience of slow-mo has been that he's just weirdly effective. When he's on the ball trying to create, it looks a little funny because he's got all these shifty changes of speed between slow and really slow, but he just somehow does manage to make it work competently on offense. And I knew he was a good defender, but advanced analytics love his defense. They think he's amongst the very top defenders in the league, which I hadn't really registered. 98th percentile. And you can see all the different ways that he's really effective. And then his passer rating, which is mostly based on, I think, assists to turnover ratio, but he's a really reliable passer. You can see him fit in a sort of mini Draymond way, being an excellent defender, the offense flow. There was this issue last year about him being a dreadful shooter. I believe he had some kind of eye problem, and that was preventing him from shooting as well as in the past. And in the past, I think he never was a really good shooter, but at least he was competent. And this last season was a little troublesome.
Yeah, I think that's really the only concern with him is he's never really been known as a spacer, as a guy who's going to knock in threes. He doesn't really take them at a high clip. He doesn't make them at a high clip. There was that one outlier year, the season before this season, where he was in like the 40s shooting for Minnesota. But before that, it's all been like sub 30, like high 20s. So in that sense, I think him and Draymond kind of share that issue of not necessarily being guys you have to always respect at the 3-point line. But if he can at least knock in 1 out of 3 each game, something in that realm, I think that will at least make up for the difference. But that if that's really the only concern, I think with everything else he brings to the table, it more than makes up for it.
And so we should be expecting him to guard bigger guys. So historically last year, it looks like he was guarding mostly at 4s and 3s and sometimes can switch up and down. So pretty versatile, but on the bigger side.
Yeah, the Warriors usually size down everyone. If you were a power forward, you're probably playing center. If you're a small forward, you're probably playing power forwards. My expectation for Cal is he's probably going to be playing a lot in the second unit. I'm guessing we see both Trayce and JK in those second units, maybe not always together. Again, it depends on the development of JK's 3-pointer if he can play that 3 role. But I would expect Kyle to play a lot of 4 in those lineups, maybe some 3 and maybe at times some 5, but depends on how things work out.
Let's talk about De'Anthony Melton.
Melton was up on my board, but I didn't necessarily love the fit in Golden State. I felt like he overlapped a little bit too much with GP2. So that's why I had someone like Kyle a bit above him, because I felt like he was a better fit. But I do think Melton is, when healthy, just a really good player. He's a bit undersized, but he's a great defender, especially at the POA level. I think he rivals Gary Payton in terms of his ability on that end. We saw in that Memphis series against the Warriors in the championship year where he was just giving Steph and everyone else a ton of problems. On top of being a great defender, I feel like offensively, he's a good secondary playmaker. He's a good 3-point shooter, just does all the little things offensively, moving without the ball, being in the right spots. Again, like Kyle, just another really cerebral player. So I think he fits really well on both ends of the floor for them.
De'Anthony definitely has this reputation of being a ferocious point of attack on-ball defender. Looking at these advanced stats, ultra elite in deflections and creating turnovers, and just one of the very top analytics defenders in the league. And he has above average offense. It was interesting watching his highlights because he has a certain amount of hot dog to him, a certain amount of, I don't know, like Jordan Clarkson, irrational confidence kind of game that I didn't expect to see. I just think these really smart, talented defenders is really cerebral. And then suddenly to have him have a little bit of a wild side on offense is pretty interesting and funny. He had back issues, really hampered his game last year, and probably were a part of why the Warriors got him for cheaper than people expected.
It's not like he has had significant health issues in the past, but if this is something that's reoccurring, but if not, I think it's a bargain signing for them at the non-tax pyramid level. For everything he can offer them, it just makes a lot of sense. And I think he will take a lot of pressure off both Steph and Brandin in that backcourt. Because, I mean, they're not bad defenders in either of them, but they don't necessarily offer what something like Melton can offer. And especially without Klay back there anymore, they need a guy who can do something on the defensive end. So I think Melton in that regard will offer them even more than Klay could, although he doesn't quite have the size to go against those bigger shooting guards.
Yeah, just noticing his height is officially here 6'2" and a little bit, but his wingspan is 6'8.5". In theory, he can defend up a little bit.
Like Draymond plays much bigger.
Steve Kerr and Mike Dunleavy Jr. have been talking about being a top 10 defense as a goal. And so you can really see the attraction of Melton and Anderson.
If you know, look at the roster construction, it's a team that has to hang their hand on defense because that's where you have the majority of your talent. Draymond's a great defender. Wiggins, when he's locked in, is a great defender. And then you have guys secondary positions like Melton and Peyton, Anderson, Looney, Moody, and JK too. And Trayce, obviously. That's a lot defensively there. And offensively, you have Steph, and then you have JK and a couple other guys who can do some things. But if they're winning games, it's because they're holding opponents to less than 100 points.
Right. Now for something completely different, let's talk about Buddy Hield. If you're basing your team on defensive strengths, you still need somebody to put the ball in the basket, and you really need spacing. And Buddy Hield became available, and the guy has poured in a huge number of three-pointers. You always see these statistics like he and Steph have scored the most three-pointers in the last N years. So he definitely gets it done volume-wise. And I think his efficiency is good, but people always talk about the Buddy Hield experience. And I guess the way the Buddy Hield experience goes is that he comes to a team and you think, wow, look at this guy. He's athletic. He's a dead-eye shooter. If he just commits on defense and just learns a game plan, he's going to be borderline all-star. And then massive disappointment ensues when that doesn't happen.
I think the easiest way to look at Buddy at this point is he's a budget Klay, right? They lose Klay. They need to make up for that volume of three-point shooting somewhere. So you bring in a guy like Buddy Hield, who was not on the level of Klay, but at their point of their respective careers, I don't know how big of a gap there is, at least in terms of the shooting perspective. I don't know if Buddy can really offer them much more than that. He's a great catch and shooter. He can create a little bit off the dribble, but in terms of creating for others or really having an impact defensively, it's just not going to be there from him. I would expect him to probably not be like a mainstay in the rotation, but a guy that they'll throw into certain lineups and certain game situations. If you're trailing in a game and you need to get some offense going, put Buddy Hield in there. And he'll definitely have some great games where he'll be like 4 or 5 from 3 and be a big part of them winning. And then there'll be games where you're going to rip your head out when he's shooting 0 of 7.
At this crafted NBA site, looking at Klay's stats, they have these player comps, and on offense, his number one comp is Buddy Hield.
Yep.
Probably because it's the same kind of recipe. He does take a lot of catch and shoots. Also looking at Buddy Hield highlights, he creates a fair amount off the dribble. So that might be an interesting new wrinkle. And these analytics consider Buddy right now better than Klay straight up. About as good on offense and better on defense. For me, I feel like the key to surviving the Buddy Hield experience is I expect him to shoot above average threes. And I don't need elite. I just need him to make a lot of open threes and to try on defense and not get too lost in the game plan. And I don't have a lot of expectations beyond that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the keys is going to be just how Kerr utilizes him. Because, I mean, we kind of experienced the Buddy Hield experience last year with Klay. Klay would have some awful games where he should have been taken off the floor at points. And I feel like Steve left him in there. And part of that is Klay's pedigree and his familiarity with the system. And so because Buddy doesn't have that, I would expect if he's not playing up to standard, Kerr would pull him pretty quickly. So I think that would be one way to mitigate that.
Wow, that is a harsh thing to say that Klay gave us the Buddy Hield experience last year, but I can't exactly argue with that. Maybe one way to think of it is, in some ways, Buddy Hield is a budget Klay, but maybe he's really a premium Nick Young.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Okay, so those are the big ticket signings, Melton, Hield, and Anderson. Now, if you're a hardcore Warriors fan, you might say, wait, there are 8 other players on the roster you haven't talked about. These guys are the most interesting ones because they're fighting for their jobs during the preseason. Well, we do cover all the other players in the complete version of this discussion, and I'll put a link here so you can go there if you're curious about the other guys like Lindy Waters III, Native American sharpshooting three-point specialist, Gui Santos, the Brazilian Olympian, Pat Spencer, the GOAT college lacrosse player trying to make it in basketball, Reece Beekman, college defensive player of the year, Quinten Post. The Warriors spent millions of dollars to draft this Dutch stretch big, Kevin Knox II, God of Chaos, the breakout comeback star in Summer League, Jackson Rowe, the steady hand from the Santa Cruz Warriors, Blake Hinson, scoring machine. If those stories sound interesting to you, go over to the full version of this conversation.